Salamat din Mendoza. We still have seats here. So, yung mga nasa likod, you can occupy some seats here. Thank you. So, as mentioned by Dean Mendoza, this is the third of the series of lectures on natural disasters. So the first one was on the mass media and the science of natural disasters, which was held at the CM Recto. And the second one was on local knowledges and sense making, held at the Parma Hall for Aten. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our speaker for this afternoon's lecture. Our speaker is Assistant Professor at the University of the Philippines College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, Department of Political Science. She earned her PhD in Political Science at the Graduate School of International Cooperation Studies in Kobe University in Japan. She earned her Master's degree in Public Administration here in this college. She teaches courses on Philippine government and politics, Philippine national and local administration, to name a few. Our speaker also served as Deputy Director for the UP Technical Studies Center, and her current publication includes Comparative Politics and Government, Democratization and Development, a book she co-edited with Dr. Teresa S. Encarnacion Taden. She is also the project leader of an ongoing research granted by the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Development entitled Pagpindog ang Bugtog, Improvising Local Governance and the Actual Utilization of LDRRMF in Yolanda Ravage, Leyte, and Mr. Sama. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to present to you our speaker, Dr. Perlita Frago.
Thank you very much, Professor Gano, for that gracious introduction. Good afternoon, Dean Mendoza, panel reactors, Dr. Berse, Dr. Barcino, and Dr. Vendera, guests, colleagues, friends, students of public administration, and students possibly from other colleges. So it is good to be back here, and indeed there's so much change that I notice in this building, especially this room, which is very case room, good for discussion, and conducive for teaching and for learning. Okay, so since I only have about 30 to 40 minutes, I think I can go right ahead with my presentation for today. So basically, as mentioned by Professor Gano, for today I will be presenting some highlights of our findings. Entitled Pagpindog ang Bugtog, Improvising Local Governance, Yolanda Ravage, Leyte, and Malandiga, Eastern Samar. Okay. I actually was able to check this. It's compatible with Progenical, but I guess it takes time. Excuse me. taken out of my talk. The few minutes that we were fixing the laptop. Okay, so this is actually just a part of our study. So for this lecture, it's part of a larger study entitled, as mentioned by the Dean earlier, Hapag-Indog Handungtong. Does anybody know what it means? So actually, it means in Filipino sa pagbangon ng bayan. But essentially, if you want to translate it to English, it actually means recovery. No? So this is the larger study, and for today, I wanted to discuss with you the improvising local governance fund. So as mentioned also, it was funded by the UP-OBCRD under its Source of Solutions grant. And I have to acknowledge the fact that the research project was a product of collaborative efforts of EVOL Third World Studies Center Research Lab. So they just placed confidence in me to be able to lead the project. And we constituted the research team afterwards. One of our researchers is here. See Mr. Raymond Fred Magia, instructor from the College of Engineering. So for the methodology of our study, we employed purely, primarily qualitative data gathering techniques. First, we had documents analysis. Then we conducted a pre-validation workshop last April 7, wherein DBM representative, Marikina M. Dream Officer, and then your very own local government fiscal administration specialist from this college, and faculty from the UP CSWCD Community Development also attended that workshop. After that, we went to Palo and Balangiga to conduct field work from April 9 to May 9. So I supervised and conducted the first week. The courtesy call, and as much as possible covered interviews with municipal officials, and then later on I allowed my research associates to basically handle the early time officials. So we also did participatory observation. At the time, there was actually fear, because there was also a typhoon at the time. In fact, our very own PPSA conference was cancelled during that time. So we were all fearful of what would happen there. But nevertheless, it went well. So we did primary and secondary analysis of data afterwards. And for today, we're having the public lecture. So the findings, however, of our study are yet to be validated with the key informants in a post-validation workshop. So I target it around this month as well. So the first question that you might want to ask is, why Palo and Balangiga? So this is just to give you an idea of the geographic location of those two municipalities. So the selection of cases, we use the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council data on areas with the highest number of totally damaged houses. Why? Because we perceive that this is the clearest and straightforward indicator of areas that have been hardest hit by Yolanda. Afterwards, we utilize data from the National Statistics Office. Unfortunately, the most updated one at the time was the 2010 data. And then we ran this together with the totally damaged houses and the NSO data covering the highest number of households. And after the ranking, it turned out that Palo and Balangiga yielded the highest percentage of totally damaged houses. Okay, so this is Palo. It is a third-class municipality. This is just what I wanted to show here. And Balangiga is a fourth-class municipality. Take note that the divisions of municipalities, the classification of municipalities will have something to do with their income-generating capacity. So that being a third-class municipality would mean that Palo earns higher income than Balangiga. So, the question to ask. when disasters of unimaginable proportions strike, what mechanisms are in place to ensure the safety and protection of local communities? So at the background, this was the facade of Tacloban Airport at the time. So you might ask, how do we answer this question? We can examine laws. So for students here of policy, you might be interested in studying RA 101-21, the P-DREAM Act of 2010, Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010. It is lauded for these salient features. It enables local government units to have greater flexibility. So emphasizing the mitigation and preparation phases of disaster management. It also enables LGUs to utilize a minimum of 5%. So meaning, they can raise 5% allocation for calamity funds. And this places more emphasis on strengthening the capacity of people to anticipate and cope with disasters. Also, the other part of our study basically would focus more on the law, on the policy, the funds. But for this particular lecture, I opted, because my background also is not only public administration, but I also happen to teach political science. So I would like to focus on the informal, on dynamics or the dimension of the issue. So but I want to emphasize the fact that it allows for the immediate release of calamity funds. So for mitigation preparedness, that would be 70%, and for quick response funds, meaning during the time of disaster, that would be 30%. So we can also look at improvisations. So just where do we actually plot or map this improvisation dynamics? So if you know the disaster phase management cycle, where you see mitigation, preparation, and then of course we have response, recovery, and rehabilitation. You can locate improvisations to take place in the response side. So for this particular purpose of this lecture, we are focusing on that. So what are improvisations? First, let us try to examine this excerpt from Sherkansky and Salmanovich. Little, if anything, in real life can be planned to the last detail, and detailed plans can rarely be carried out in full. Improvisation comes to fill the gaps. Okay, so what are improvisations? So the term first. Okay, so basically, if you examine all these definitions, you will notice the images that this term will evoke. So when you say improvisation, it can mean an adaptive strategy used when faced with situations for which no procedures exist. So you find that in the absence of clear procedures to implement at the moment, you improvise. Or it can also mean creative and spontaneous behavior of managing an unexpected event. So we highlight the novelty of the situation. So if you examine all those definitions, you'll find that the convergence will have to do with the three elements. And what are these elements? So this involves, according to Trotter, behavioral or cognitive time constraining activity to meet certain objectives. The close proximity in time between planning and execution of an action. So the situation is here. What do? You have no time to do comprehensive planning examination, so you have immediately on the basis of that improvisation strategy. And of course, a deviation from existing practices. And another definition from Sherkansky and Salmanovich, it is extemporaneous action. Okay, so now you know what improvisation means. Here are pictures. So when we went to Leyte in April, so this part would be what we stayed in Tacloban. So from Tacloban, we had to ride jeepney, multicab, and then sometimes habal-habal. So we went there, And we saw this side, tents. But you can see it from there, the donors. The names of the donors will be printed on tents, as reported by the media. And there you will find the facade of the municipal hall in Bacoor. And of course, UP of Beijing, that stood the Yolanda Super Typhoon. Okay, more pictures of Palo Cathedral. At the time, that was the site of the mass graves. Also along the side of the church. So this was next to the municipal hall. Okay. Now, let us try to examine the background of the local chief executive, the mayor. Okay? Who is, I'm sure you all know, Mayor Medros Pitiluan. So she is a senior citizen, about 75 years old, or maybe 76 now. A motherly politician who comes from a political family, the Loreto, and of course the Lorena. She has a strong network of business and political friends, local, regional, and we have to highlight the fact that she has vast leadership experience. Now, why? No, she was governor, mayor, congresswoman. And of course, definitely the network, she would have at present the governor, her son, and then Secretary Jericho Petilla, the Department of Energy. Why do we need to examine leadership? Because we focus on practices, improvisation strategies innovated by the local chief executive. Okay, so this is text heavy, I know. However, you just focus on what this slide is trying to say. The context basically tells us what took place before, during, and of course, after. So during the response page. So before the typhoon, the mayor basically created a task force. There were several meetings. They knew that the typhoon was going to come a week before. They knew that there was going to be a low pressure area because that was the news. So immediately, she was able to create a task force. And during the time of the typhoon, she said that the municipal hall would be the center of operations. When the typhoon came, everybody, this was called cross-validated with interviews. So with other municipal officials. The mayor stayed and slept at the municipal hall. So all the while she was there. She was on top of the situation. She never left the municipal hall and she coordinated everything. So her house was destroyed as well. Then, regarding the improvisations, we have to mention, of course, other improvisations by her teammates. So the vice mayor of Palo at the time, so during the typhoon, the vice mayor was away from the municipal hall. He stayed at home because his main concern was his family. However, after the typhoon, he was the one who went out on the field. So the vice mayor initiated the inventory and documentation of survivors, casualties, damages, and organized community relief operations. Was it his role to do all that? No. So he went out of his way to actually document everything. Unexperienced vice mayor, he is a lawyer. He is a lawyer and he has NGO experience. He also prides himself in having taken units in sociology. So he was able to conduct all those surveying and observation methods. So he complemented the work of the mayor. And after the typhoon, there were scarcity of resources. The fuel was basically scarce. So basically, the mayor thought of negotiating with the council councilor to actually sell the gas, the fuel to the municipality. And then the municipality in turn will distribute the resources equally among the constituents. So this arrangement clearly is an improvisation. So the mayor had the gas station fixed, and in exchange, the gas station owner, who happens to be a councilor, would have to sell the fuel to the mayor, the municipality. And for steady supply price, the same similar arrangement, improvisation. The mayor asked the agriculturists to survey the least damaged rice mill. And in exchange for fixing the damaged rice mill, the owner must not ask for payment of these services to actually grind the rice. Then in the aftermath, as a response, of course, the mayor actually instructed his team to do procurement. And it was enough for the mayor to actually just sign, have the paper sign, her name, and then this served as payments, temporary payments, or promises to pay them. Other improvisations. Okay, other improvisations. So, alternative source of funds. You might say, is this being done? But I'm in other LGUs as well. But they were able to think of a creative alternative source of funds by exacting a 2 peso environmental fee for every transaction with the municipality. So it's an improvisation in this LGU. So when the typhoon came, so you say, is this legal? Yes, there was a resolution for this. But when the typhoon came, this was useful because they were not able to access the LGU funds right away. So they used this as alternative source of funds. To facilitate search and retrieval of the dead, the Balo communities themselves, those whose family members, relatives died in the typhoon, had to cooperate and do the searching themselves. Why? Who else could identify the bodies? So you could imagine the trauma of finding friends, relatives in the debris or under the debris. To do away with red tape, the mayor was given by the SB blanket authority to receive aid as long as they are all Yolanda related. Right? And for lack of enough people to distribute relief goods, the mayor was in the municipal hall, and the donors that would come, she would say thank you and say, please, we don't have people, could you please distribute the goods yourselves? So enough people to distribute. So this can be perceived as improvisations. Now this is the resolution that was passed by the SB so that the local chief executive can accept donations and take note of the date, November 26, and it was implemented right away. So after the November 8th typhoon. And this was how they monitored their casualties, injured, etc. So take note, so this would be the data containing the households. You would find that these are all being updated. So when we went there, updated din sila, but this marking was not February 12, 2014, but we went there in April. But the figures are not very far from the present figures. So about 900 to 980 people were reported dead as of April 2014. Okay, now let's proceed to the next case. Now these pictures were given to us by the wife of the mayor, Mrs. Puso de Vera. So these pictures were taken right after the storm. So this would be Balangiga Church, where you find them. And of course, the debris. Brief background on the mayor. So this is interesting because we did not plan on utilizing these two interesting cases. Now remember, we only use NREM-C data for totally damaged houses and NSO total number of households. And then we realized how different the local chief executives of these municipalities are. So for this particular municipality, Balangiga, Mayor Discuso Lira is relatively younger, 47. Lived a corporate life, meaning he was a businessman before becoming mayor. A third termer, what does that imply? It implies that, in politics, either he's a lame duck and more opposition coming from other parties would be emerging. So his newly seated barangay captains are from the opposition party. Okay, so what were the improvisations in this municipality? Context. When the super typhoon came, the mayor was in Manila. He was away from the municipal hall. So why was he there? He was out on a fundraising trip for the LGU. So he appointed a councilor who happens to be a nurse, and designated the municipal engineer as the NREM officer. So in Palo, the designated NREM officer was a political science graduate. Okay, so I think I wasn't able to mention that. The municipal hall, during the typhoon, served mainly as a hospital for the wounded and alternative shelter for evacuees. Okay, so I observed improvisations for immediate purchase of relief goods while the mayor was away. Through a phone call from Manila, he instructed the OIC to withhold the first week's salaries, November 8, first week salaries and year-end bonuses of SP councilors, to which, of course, the rest of the members agreed because of the necessity. Why? In order to procure funds, in order to procure goods to serve as relief goods. Of course, these salaries and bonuses were reimbursed later. To expedite the process of procurement, the mayor himself, when he arrived, he said that he walked all the way from Tanawan to Tacloban, had to hitch a ride, paid 3,000 along the way up to Samar, and he had to climb over the dead bodies and debris, etc. And when he reached the municipal hall, he had to do the purchasing and procurement of goods himself. He drove a van, a truck. Why? He said if he was going to instruct and delegate the task to some people, they would just be asking him for permission. So might as well do the procurement himself para to expedite it. Now, for equal distribution of relief goods, unlike the case of Palo, when the mayor instructed donors to distribute the relief goods themselves, the Balangiga mayor said that donations must be directed to the municipality, and they themselves would do the equal distribution of goods. Now, this is an example of their bandillo. Now, the bandillo was the announcement given to the constituents. Now, we tried to decipher it. Actually, we can understand a bit, So, this instructs the constituents to basically cooperate, to evacuate, and not to panic, because the barangay officials have been instructed that they are prepared. So that's it. So later, maybe I'm running out of time, but later I'll tell you that in the case of Palo, the Bandillo announcement was simply this. Malakas, or there's going to be a super typhoon. You have to evacuate. There's likely going to be water. So despite the fact that they were monitoring the news, they could not understand storm surge. So this is another letter. So look at the date, February 4, 2014. The mayor wrote this instruction. No? It's not an instruction, it's like an appeal to the SP to actually pass any legislative measure to deter the increase of based on prices of basic commodities. Kasi definitely there would be a tendency to increase the prices. But take note, all of them are victims. Common responses observed. LDRIP funds, the calamity funds in these local government units could not be accessed. Why? Despite the promise of the law. Why? Because there were no banks in these municipalities. No? Palo's account is in Tacloban that was devastated tremendously. Balangigas bank account happens to be in Boronga, which is quite far. No? So, basically, they had to improvise. So even though you can have a check ready, how do you access the funds? Local chief executives in both municipalities initially used their money, so that's common. They negotiated and had direct procurements. Bidding was waived. That's legal. That's actually legal. So in disaster situations, they can actually waive the bidding process. And the use of IOUs and promissory notes and while payments were done later. In fact, until April, they were actually paying for the debts that they incurred. Now, this is just a bonus. I have time to discuss this. 15. Okay, so I have 15 more minutes. So the problems that we were able to get from the findings. Number one, the difficulty in evacuating the people, especially in Palo. So all the interviews cross-validated the observation that the people were stubborn despite the Bandillo. So that was the municipal officials' observation. But how do you prove this? Even the designated MDRIM officer did not evacuate his family. He has a newborn baby. Imagine that. Why? Because pwedeng magkatubig. But he did mention that that was the biggest mistake of his life. So the MDRIM officer. After this slide, the reasons. So inaccessibility of LDRIP funds, I already mentioned this point. Lack of warning system. Except for Palo, there was this warning system, but the warning system was washed out. Inadequate food supplies. Why? They had stocks. Oh yes, they had food supply. But the storage was not big enough to feed the injured, the survivors. Inadequate storage means for relief goods, or you can say inadequate because those that were salvaged, the goods that were salvaged, they were wet. So these sacks of rice had to be cooked right away. Such a waste. So remember, there was news also that said that Palo was throwing away their goods. Why? Kasi damage. So hinamag na. There were molds. And another observation, NFA in Palo allowed IOUs using the signature of the mayor. NFA in Borongan did not. So that is political. Lack of sturdy and elevated evacuation centers. No? So it's interesting. You know why? If the building is very sturdy and it's only one story, that's not good if you don't have an opening in the ceiling. Because some people actually died, they couldn't destroy the ceiling because it was too strong and it was built by China. So that was the problem. Very sturdy. However, it was noted that it was, for storm surges, it would be necessary to build elevated evacuation centers. Why? Because there was this observation that the storm surge was very fast. In seconds. They were just contemplating whether they would climb up the stairs because this family had second floor. And then in a matter of seconds, their stairs disappeared. So the vice mayor even said that he was holding on to his doorknob, the doorknob of the house, and then all of a sudden the walls started breathing, and then there was light. So that was it. That was how fast it was. So lack of sturdy and elevated evacuation. There was also security and looting problems. So we all know about this. But this problem existed mostly in Palo. Lack of relocation areas, no build zone. Okay, that's the idea. Don't build along coastal area. 40, 60 meters away, is that safe? No. 500 meters away? Maybe. But where do you relocate them? For lack of space. So lack of decent burial sites. Now these are some of the reasons why people did not evacuate. 1. Cultural predisposition. If there's this superstitious belief that if they leave their houses will be destroyed by the storm. Now that's cultural. Underestimated the typhoon. Now they're used to typhoon. Sanay sa typhoon. And there was calm before the storm. So it started around 5 and then 6. Full blown na. And earlier in Eastern Samar. Lack of information, I already mentioned the storm surge. Security reasons, lack of enough enforcers. They had not to depend on nearby LGUs who actually sent Davao, Davao, Bicol, who sent enforcers. So basically, to solve the looting problems, there was this curfew that I mentioned earlier. The declaration of curfews. A barangay captain in Balangiga could not leave his 5 sewing machines. And he stayed at his house, right beside the coastal road. Confidence in their structure. The engineer, the emblem officer of Balangiga felt that the structure of his house is very strong. So both emblem officers did not evacuate their respective families for different reasons. Okay, lessons learned. 1, responders are victims too. So this is something that we have to remember. Leadership qualities and experience, they are important indeed. We are to think of improvisations as a necessity in times of disaster. Teamwork is very important. When I mentioned about the case in Balo, the Vice Mayor complimented the work of the Mayor. In both cases, by virtue of tradition or force of habit, the residents generally wait for their leader's instructions. In both cases, yes, but we have to add the fact that the seniority of the Balo Mayor, as a patron, and here in the side, the strong personality of the Mayor. Designated emblem offices, when not institutionalized, handled purely ministerial tasks. So they just wait for what their local chief executives would say. The presence of improvisations may imply lack of adequate preparation. However, you have to think of improvisations as coping strategies as well, which is provided for by RA 101.1. Improvisations are a necessity to address urgent needs and unanticipated events. Yes, they depart from existing practices, but as the Mayor Palau mentioned, Yolanda was different. They were prepared for storms, typhoons, but this was different. So that was what she mentioned. There are advantages in having networks in the national and regional levels, and I need not explain or elaborate. Recommendations, initial recommendations for this particular presentation. LGUs must not be treated uniformly. So in terms of their capacities to manage disasters. Because as you know, they are classified according to income, and there's a reason why we classify them as third class and fourth class municipalities. Financially, they need all the help they can get. And what can we say about lower divisions? There must be sharing of improvisation practices like this. I'm hoping that there are some coming from other LGUs too, aside from our reactor. And QRFs should not only be sufficient, they should be readily accessible. Local chief executives and MDRIM officers should learn from other LGU disaster preparedness and response practices. And finally, MDRIM offices must be institutionalized. The national government should assist LGUs in institutionalizing MDRIM offices in LGUs. So why are we saying this? Are MDRIM offices supposed to be institutionalized by now? Not in all cases, as we noted in these two municipalities. During that time, there were no qualification standards according to Malapiga. Palau MDRIM officers had just occupied the position. The directives reached them, and there was a delay in reaching them the important directives and instructions. And specifically, of course, as mentioned, low-income generating municipalities that are not only vulnerable because of their capacities, but are also located in highly vulnerable areas like the Eastern Visayas. Okay, so these are the pictures. Now I don't know if Bianca is not here. So the research team of 3 that went to Balangiga and Samar, Balangiga and Palau. So the mayor, vice mayor, vice mayor. Mayor and Vice Mayor Palau, Mayor and Vice Mayor Balangiga. Okay, Councilor, that was OIC nurse, the COA of the municipality, auditor, MD officer, political science graduate of Palau, former barangay official that was afraid of that his 5 sewing machines would be stolen. Of course, so the MDRIM officer Balangiga, municipal engineer, both municipal engineers. And at the back, you will find many signs of thank, but this one is in Tacloban, the thank you sign. And in Balangiga, right outside the municipal hall, you'll find this, and so many were the thanks. So thank you also for listening.